What is going on, everybody? This is Ticket with Tippett. I'm Gavin Tippett, and today we're going through our Week 2 rankings by position for your fantasy football teams. Let's jump into it. Before we get started, don't forget, like, subscribe, share, leave a comment below on who you have ranked higher or lower than me. This is going to be a tiered ranking system, so we're just going strictly off of players and their matchups for this week only. This is not a season long or to be determined for the rest of the season kind of tier ranking. This is just for this week only. Starting at running back, tier 1, there's pretty much only one running back in this tier right now. Between the matchup against New Orleans, it is CMC. As long as he's healthy, he's the RB1. Against New Orleans, not a good run defense. He's going to dominate this game. Tier 2, we have 3 running backs in this tier. It's Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, and Bijan Robinson. So Devon Achane could see a ton of passes out of the backfield in this game. Derrick Henry could just run all over that Cleveland defense. And Bijan Robinson against Minnesota, he's going to see a lot of the same type of pass work that he saw in the game versus Tampa Bay. So expect a lot of stuff from him in a dome again. So top 3 running backs there in tier 2. In tier 3, we have some guys who would be in tier 2, but they just have tougher matchups, and then some guys who have favorable matchups that wouldn't really be in this tier normally. Guys like Jahmyr Gibbs against Chicago, tough matchup. Saquon against Kansas City is a tough matchup. Bucky against Houston's a tough matchup. And then you got your other guys like Chase Brown, Chuba Hubbard, James Cook, all guys with high touchdown upside against these defenses. And in tier 4, we have Jonathan Taylor versus Denver, Ashton Genty versus LA Chargers. Yes, I think he has a much better game against the Chargers, and I know that sounds crazy because New England's defense isn't as good as the Chargers, but he's probably going to have a better game. That was probably as poor of a start as he can get this season. Kyron Williams against Tennessee. That Tennessee defense is tough, man. They just limited Denver to 20 points, and that Denver offense can be pretty high-powered from what it looks like on the depth chart. Then we have Breece Hall versus Buffalo. He had a big game versus Pittsburgh. Buffalo showed that they really can't stop the run. I think Breece Hall is another good game. And then Travis Etienne at Cincy, one of my favorite flex starts. If you're deep in running back or you feel like you just want to take a flyer on somebody this week, Travis Etienne is the guy. He proved it last week. No more Tank Bigsby against a bad run defense. He can take over this game. In tier 5, we have our guys who are fringe starters, kind of flex spot if you don't have any other choice. We have James Conner, Tony Pollard, Jaylen Warren, and Travion Henderson. So Jaylen Warren, obviously, Kenneth Gainwell split time with him. He doesn't get much pass work, but that Seattle defense looked like it struggled heavily against Christian McCaffrey. Expect a big game from him. James Conner versus Carolina is just a favorable matchup, but Trey Benson might eat into some of his work. And then Tony Pollard versus the Rams is just a terrible matchup for Tony Pollard and that Titans offense. The Rams shut down Houston. And Travion Henderson, we still don't know exactly what he is yet, but he's likely going to see a lot of touches in this game against Miami. I see it being a tough divisional matchup, and I don't see Ramondre playing a lot in this one. I see more Travion Henderson. And in tier 6, we have Alvin Kamara, Tyron Tracy Jr., Javonte Williams, Omarion Hampton, DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Walker, and Dylan Sampson. So some of these guys blew up in week 1. Some of these guys have really bad week 1s. Like Javonte had a really good week 1. Playing against the Giants, that's another okay rush defense. They gave up a little bit to Washington last week, but I don't expect Javonte to play as good as he did last week. Alvin Kamara is one of my sits, so it's probably a guy that you pick to be your RB2 in your league. I just don't see where San Francisco's giving it up. They didn't give it up to Kenneth Walker. They didn't give it up to Zach Charbonnet. Probably sitting Alvin Kamara. Omarion Hampton struggled in his first game against Kansas City. Might have a better game here, but I do think Najee Harris continues to grow into this offense. So he only had 1 touch last week, only saw a couple targets. I think this week he's probably going to see a little bit more, kind of like 4 or 5, 6 touches and maybe 3 or 4 targets. So eating more and more into Omarion Hampton's role. DeAndre Swift at Detroit, this is just too tough of a matchup for DeAndre Swift. He's going to get a lot of work, but it's not going to be enough to produce against this Detroit defense. Kenneth Walker, he's in too much of a committee with Zach Charbonnet at the moment. I don't know exactly what his deal is in Seattle. The offensive line is horrible, though. So expect this Pittsburgh front to kind of just jump all over him. And then Tyron Tracy against Dallas is just not a good matchup again. Same kind of thing as Washington. Dallas is very similar in their rush defense, so don't expect big things from that offensive line in Tyron Tracy. And then Dylan Sampson, he actually might be the player that probably should have been moved up to tier 5 in this list. but we don't know what's going to happen with Judkins coming back if Judkins is able to play. It doesn't look like he's going to play. So Dylan Sampson could move up this list if Quinshon Judkins doesn't play. And then our final tier, these are the guys that I'm sitting pretty much no matter what this week. Guys like Nick Chubb, J.K. Dobbins, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery, and Isaiah Pacheco. All super tough matchups. Ramondre probably has the easiest one. Ramondre Stevenson, obviously, like I said, splitting work with Travion, and I expect Travion to take a lot more of that role this week against Miami. Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, obviously in a split backfield. J.K. Dobbins in a split backfield. R.J. Harvey showed tons of potential to break away and be explosive in that game, while J.K. pretty much didn't do much. He averaged just below 4 yards per carry, where R.J. Harvey broke up in a 50-yarder. So I don't know what to expect. This Indy defense looks pretty good. Probably sitting J.K. Dobbins this week. Then we got Nick Chubb versus Tampa Bay. Houston's offense didn't look too good. If Vita Vea is back, Nick Chubb isn't going to do a lot because he is just a pound and ground kind of runner. So just don't expect big things from Nick Chubb. And then obviously David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, both in split backfields against tough rush defenses. We got to sit them this week. Now let's move on to our wide receiver rankings. So obviously at the top we have CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase, both with super favorable matchups against the Giants and Jacksonville Jaguars respectively. So both having bad weeks in a different type of way. CeeDee with the multiple drops. Jamar just Cincinnati continues to start off slow for some reason, but expect for both of these players to have good games against bad defenses and good matchups for themselves. Tier 2 is filled with Nico Collins and Brian Thomas, two guys who really struggled in week 1. And Brian Thomas Jr. was covered by J.C. Horn pretty much the entire game against Carolina. So expect bigger and better things from these two players with way better matchups than they had in week 1. And we're dropping down to tier 3. There's only 3 guys I see here: Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and JSN. 2 of them getting a ton of targets in their offense, just playing tough defenses. If Pittsburgh plays any kind of better than they did against the Jets, which I think they will because they play better against non-mobile quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, he's a pocket passer, so not expecting huge things from him. So JSN will be good enough just purely off of volume, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown should figure it out against Chicago. If Jalen Johnson misses time again, he's going to have no problem scoring points for you this week. And in tier 4, it's your typical guys: Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, Drake London, T. Higgins, Lad McConkey, and Jacoby Myers. So Jacoby Myers is jumping up pretty high here. Jacoby Myers against the Los Angeles Chargers, they're probably going to be down in this game, and he's probably going to see a ton of passes. T. Higgins, same thing. It's going to be a shootout with Jacksonville. He's going to see a ton of pass work. Lad McConkey, he's just off of pure volume alone. Same thing with Drake London and Malik Neighbors and Justin Jefferson, just off of volume. Some of them easier matchups than other, but I think they're all in the same tier, bunched up together. Then we'll move down to tier 5, where I have A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, Cortland Sutton, Ricky Pearsall, DK Metcalf. All of these guys have different traits about them that make them interesting. So Garrett Wilson, Ricky Pearsall, Cortland Sutton, DK, obviously getting the volume portion of it, whereas A.J. Brown and Mike Evans just have tough matchups. Normally they'd be a little bit higher on this list, but Evans is likely going to be covered by Derek Stingley and A.J. Brown by Trent McDuffie with safety help over the top. So just 2 really hard matchups for these guys. Cortland Sutton, if Indy's defense plays the same way they played last week, which I don't think they will, I think they will see some regression. Miami just looked awful in that game. Cortland Sutton's a pretty good matchup for anybody that you put him up against, so he's always going to get you, a decent amount of fantasy points. He's never really going to throw up a dud, so just a solid tier 5 option. And in tier 6, we got Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, George Pickens, Ted McMillan, Jameson Williams, and Devontae Smith. These are all guys who I kind of like either in their matchups or just have a little bit of a tough matchup. Like Emeka Egbuka will probably be one higher, but like I said, it's either him or Mike Evans getting covered by Derek Stingley, and it's never a good option when you're covered by Derek Stingley. Marvin Harrison, favorable matchup. He's probably going to produce again. Ted McMillan, Bryce Young looks horrible, but Arizona's defense is okay. It's not the greatest defense in the world fantasy-wise, so Ted McMillan still will see that volume, so we'll see what happens there. George Pickens probably with the most favorable matchup in this list. He's playing against the New York Giants. Their cornerback, too, is just god-awful, so Pickens could see a ton of passes his way. Jameson Williams and Devontae Smith will likely pick it up, playing tough defenses, but they are the number 2 receivers in their offense and could see a little bit of work. And then we'll jump to tier 7, where we have guys like Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Zay Flowers, Michael Pittman, Rome Odunze, Tyreek Hill, and Hollywood Brown. These are all guys who pretty much play tough defenses. They're playing against top corners. The only one who doesn't play against the top corner is Keenan Allen, but he did play majority from the slot. And Quentin Johnson played more snaps than he did. I just think that his rapport with Justin Herbert's a little bit stronger than Quentin Johnson. So I'm going to throw Keenan Allen above Quentin Johnson in this list. I don't even have Quentin Johnson in the next tier, which we'll see. But all these guys have strange types of matchups, hard matchups, or they're just a number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver in their offense. So these are guys that I'm not really fading. These are like really fringe flex options that I'm throwing in for this week. And then tier 8, these are the guys that I'm likely sitting unless your team is really hurt and you need to take a flyer on somebody. These are who I would put in tier 8's Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Cedric Tillman, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Kayshon Boutte, and Darnell Mooney. So you could probably throw Quentin Johnson into this list as well as a flyer. So tier 8 players. These are guys that I'm just staying away from this week as much as I can. Really tough matchups for some of them, and also split work for some of these guys as well. So just stay away from these guys for this week too. Then we'll move on to tight end rankings. Tight end rankings where we have Brock Bowers and Trey McBride at 1 and 2. If Brock Bowers plays this week, it looks like he might not. He didn't practice again on Friday, so we'll see what happens there. But if he is obviously the number 1 option. Michael Mayer will come in and replace him if he doesn't play. So if you are a Brock Bowers fantasy owner and you can drop somebody to pick up, Michael Mayer, go ahead and do that. Tier 2, we have Tyler Warren, Sam Laporta, and TJ Hawkinson. So TJ Hawkinson didn't have a great game against Chicago, but that's a tougher matchup. Atlanta normally gives up points to tight ends. They like to just, let the tight ends be open and give check downs. So Sam Laporta, Tyler Warren obviously speak for themselves. They're great tight ends and good offenses. So we'll keep that moving. Travis Kelce, Dallas Goedert, Harold Fannin, Mark Andrews, and Hunter Henry round out tier 3. Some of them with tougher matchups than other. Dallas Goedert is actually out now, so this list was made before the news that he came out. This will really just be Kelce, Fannin, Andrews, and Hunter Henry. 2 of them were really favorable matchups, Andrews and Hunter Henry, with favorable matchups against Cleveland and Miami. But Mark Andrews didn't get a ton of work in the game against Buffalo. He only had 1 target, so should see target numbers go up for him in this game, especially with likely probably out this game as well. And then Hunter Henry, he's one of Drake May's favorite targets, so he's going to see a ton of volume against this bad Miami defense. Harold Fannin, he's like a gadget guy now for Cleveland. He's getting screens, he's getting rush attempts, he's like the slot receiver part-time. So against Baltimore, they're going to be pass heavy. He's going to see a lot of touches. Then Travis Kelce against Philly. He seems to always play well in big-time games and big-time moments, so Travis Kelce is just probably a good little play here for week 2. And then we have tier 4, Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, Juwan Johnson, Jonnu Smith, and Jake Ferguson. Most of these guys are really good matchups. Like I said, David Njoku, Cleveland against Baltimore. They're probably going to pass the ball a ton. Juwan Johnson, something very similar. He was one of Spencer Rattler's favorite targets, 11 targets on week 1. So same kind of game style. They're going to be down in the game. They're going to pass the ball a ton. Juwan Johnson is going to get the targets with no competition in that offense. Kyle Pitts, he saw a really good day, but it looks like Darnell Mooney's going to play, so he kind of drops down a tier. He probably would have been a tier 3 tight end for me, but being that Darnell Mooney's back and going to be taking some of those targets now, that offense gets a little more crowded again. Kyle Pitts probably drops down 1 tier for me. And then Jonnu Smith and Jake Ferguson, both with really favorable matchups. If George Kittle didn't get hurt, he would have torched Seattle. Jonnu Smith has the opportunity to do the same thing. Seattle is not good against the tight end. They just don't have any safety help to cover a good tight end. And then Jake Ferguson against New York, similar to Jonnu Smith. Great matchup. Probably going to see the red zone a lot, so he has a bunch of opportunities to score touchdowns. And then we have our final tier here for the tight ends. Once it gets past this tier, it's really shaky, so if you don't have anybody within these top 5 tiers, that might be a problem for you. So tier 5, Evan Ingram against Indianapolis. This is a tough defense from what it looks like. We don't know exactly what Indy is. We do know that Courtland Sutton is still a target hog and that this offense is kind of spread out after that. Evan Ingram didn't really see a bunch of targets, so it's kind of in tier 5. Same things with like Brenton Strange, Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid, actually a weird thing, only played 50% of the snaps, so Dawson Knox still saw quite a bit of those snaps. And they still played Josh Palmer. They played a lot of three wide receiver sets, so Strange out of Buffalo to do that, but Dalton Kincaid didn't really get a ton of work. He just happened to score a touchdown and catch a couple passes in a really high-scoring game, so kind of helped him out there. Guys like Dalton Schultz against Tampa Bay. Dalton Schultz has a really good matchup But if Christian Kirk has any chance of playing, then that's obviously going to take away from Dalton Schultz and take away from his opportunity versus Tampa. Chigo Konkwu didn't show anything against the Rams, even had a couple drops that game. Didn't help Cam Ward out at all. So don't know if Cam Ward's going to be able to trust him, especially against a hard Los Angeles Rams defense. We don't know. Chigo Konkwu is just not, he's not even streamable right now. So Pat Freiermuth, obviously the tight end 2 versus Seattle, but I do like him over Chigo Konkwu. I like him over Dalton Schultz. So, I mean, he's not a bad option if you are out of options and he's on the waiver. This would probably be my top guy other than Evan Ingram in this list. Colson Loveland and Cole Kmet. This is just a split tight end room. Cole Kmet obviously played better, but this is a tough matchup against Detroit. Tucker Kraft had a good game, but that's because Tucker Kraft is a really good tight end. And speaking of Tucker Kraft, if you see that there's no Washington and Green Bay players, I did not make a list for Washington and Green Bay because the game already happened. So I will try and get this list out a little bit earlier in the week, and that way we can talk about who to start in the Thursday night games as well. So we'll get that out next week like that. And then we'll move on to quarterbacks now. So tier 1, there's only 2 quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, both with pretty favorable matchups on both sides. So both have a chance to light it up with a ton of points. Tier 2, these are guys who, light it up or maybe can light it up against certain teams. So, but just a little bit tougher matchups for Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields. Tougher matchups than they had with Pittsburgh and Jalen Hurts had with Dallas. So Kansas City's defense is better. Buffalo's defense is a little bit not better than Pittsburgh's, but they do play better against the mobile quarterback. Still not good. So Justin Fields is still up on that tier 2 as of right now for week 2. And then Dak Prescott and Joe Burrow, both with really favorable matchups, both have a chance to have a high-scoring week. So they're up there in tier 2. And same thing with Justin Herbert. He lit it up against Kansas City. Las Vegas is much worse. So Justin Herbert's probably going to have a good chance to go out there and score some points. And then we have tier 3, which is made up of Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, and CJ Stroud. Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes, obviously the 2 better of these 5 quarterbacks, but Mahomes against Philly in a Super Bowl rematch, and then Jared Goff against Chicago, who seemed to pretty much shut J.J. McCarthy down for 3.5 quarters, and then Chicago's offense forgot how to play, and the defense was on the field for majority of the time, burning them out. So Jared Goff has a good chance to come out here, get a get back game. They're probably a little, PO'd from that game against Green Bay, so we'll see what happens there and how things go. Trevor Lawrence against Cincinnati, Geno Smith against LA, and CJ Stroud versus Tampa Bay, all great chances for them to go out there and throw the ball a ton in these types of games. Tier 4 is made up of Baker Mayfield, Michael Penix, Kyler Murray, Drake May, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and Joe Flacco. So Joe Flacco obviously with the volume, Drake May probably with a ton of volume. That game's probably going to be pretty close. And Baker Mayfield is just in a tough matchup against Houston. There's nothing else to say other than Derek Stingley is going to be covering one of his 2 best wide receivers, and he's going to only have one other offensive weapon to throw to. So not a lot for Baker Mayfield this week against Houston. Michael Penix against Minnesota, kind of similar to Tampa Bay last week. He's playing in a dome. He's probably going to have a decent game. Just depends on how that Minnesota defense shows up and plays. If they play like they did against Chicago in that second half, then they absolutely can go out there and shut down Michael Penix. Kyler versus Carolina, great matchup in a dome. Bo Nix versus Indy. He has a chance to pop off a little bit if Indy's defense isn't as good as it looked against Miami. If it's just a really bad offense, then we'll have that answer by week 2. But Bo Nix didn't play great against Tennessee. This looks like a pretty similar offense, maybe a little bit worse than Tennessee's. So we'll see where Bo Nix finishes, but I have him in tier 4 with guys like Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. Caleb Williams is also on this list in tier 4, playing against Detroit. Tough defense. Back-to-back games against divisional teams, and going to Ford Field is going to be tough. Those fans are going to be just absolutely nuts for the first game of the year. And tier 5 consists of guys that either had really bad weeks and have better matchups, or had really good weeks, and we just need to see it again to believe it. So Aaron Rodgers, obviously 4 touchdowns against the New York Jets. He plays against Seattle, which is a more favorable matchup. This is a defense that knows DK Metcalf in and out, who's his number 1 receiver and number 1 passing option. He's got Jonnu Smith. That's going to help him out a lot. He's got Pat Freiermuth. That's going to help him out a lot. They don't play good against the tight ends. Their run defense is terrible, so you're probably going to see Jaylen Warren have more points and Kenneth Gainwell, honestly, to get some points too. Maybe even Caleb Johnson get some rushes against a really bad Seattle rush defense. So I just think Aaron Rodgers doesn't have as much opportunity to throw the football like he did against the New York Jets, where it was kind of that shootout style game. I think this is a low scoring game, and I don't see where Aaron Rodgers finishes the same that he did last week. Tua against New England, probably a little bit easier of a matchup. Still no Christian Gonzalez. He was ruled out. Still not a great New England defense without Christian Gonzalez. So Tua has a better chance this week to go out there and really prove himself again. See if he can go back out there. But with the way he looked last week, there's no way I can put him any higher than tier 5. Same thing with Sam Darnold. He didn't look very good in his opener against San Francisco. Pittsburgh's probably gonna be a little PO'd that they gave up 32 points to Justin Fields. So probably gonna play a little bit stronger of a defense. If Joey Porter Jr. plays, then obviously that's a huge get. He's pretty much going to lock up JSN with safety help over the top, and then they have nobody else. Cooper Kupp is not a viable option anymore. Pittsburgh, obviously, tougher matchup. So Sam Darnold still in that tier 5 where he might not score that many points. And then we have Matthew Stafford against Tennessee. Love Matthew Stafford as a year-long play. Tennessee just showed that they could shut down a quarterback in the passing game. Same thing that they did to Bo Nix, and Matthew Stafford isn't mobile. So that Tennessee rush is going to get to him, and those cornerbacks are really good in Tennessee. So tough matchup for Stafford again in week 2. So Stafford's a better long-term play later in the year, so he's probably going to be a good buy. People are going to see him have 2 mediocre or bad weeks and then be like, man, Matthew Stafford's probably washed. Well, no, he just played probably the 2 best defenses he's going to play all season in Houston and Tennessee. So just be on the lookout for that for Matthew Stafford. If you're in a 2 quarterback league or quarterback premium league, just be on the lookout for Matthew Stafford as a potential buy. Then we have JJ McCarthy to fill out tier 5 versus Atlanta. He's going to be at home for his first game in Minnesota. Just a tough matchup though. Atlanta's safeties can kind of confuse you, and AJ Terrell's obviously a lockdown corner. So you get safety help over the top with the lockdown. No Jordan Addison still. He's still on suspension. This is a tough game for JJ McCarthy to go in. Sunday Night Football again, so another primetime game. This time just against a better team, I think. I think Atlanta's better than Chicago. Sunday Night Football again, like I said, primetime. We'll see if he can do it again, but I don't see him. Without him scoring that rushing touchdown, he probably wasn't going to finish as like a top 10 quarterback, but just because of that rushing touchdown alone, he pretty much did. We'll see what happens with JJ and see if he can pick things up from here. And then tier 6, these are guys who either have really tough matchups or I just don't see anything in. Daniel Jones versus Denver. It was a Cinderella story in week 1 playing against Miami, but this Denver defense, man, it is just completely different than anything Daniel Jones is going to play all year. They limited Cam Ward to 2.5 points. So Daniel Jones, he's not too much better than Cam Ward. I don't see where he gets, that much more than Cam Ward in this kind of game. I think Jonathan Taylor's kind of got to take over for this team because Pat Surtain is locking up Michael Pittman, and then there's no other options other than Tyler Warren against Denver. So we'll see what happens with Daniel Jones. Russell Wilson, obviously not good. They're playing Dallas. Jackson Dart might get thrown into this game eventually if it goes bad. So then we have guys like Cam Ward, Mac Jones, Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young, all guys who just don't have it yet. Cam Ward playing against another tough defense to start his rookie career. Played against Denver. Now he's got to play against Los Angeles Rams. It is just tough out here for him. His wide receivers and tight ends just drop everything that's thrown to him. So see what happens for Cam Ward. Mac Jones, obviously, we're not expecting too much against New Orleans. Probably going to be a lot of the C-Mac show. Like I said, he's the number 1 running back on my list right now. So we'll see. Spencer Rattler and Bryce Young, both just bad quarterbacks and really bad offenses. Not a ton of options to throw to. Not the best targets in the world. So tough defenses, tough games for Bryce Young and Spencer Rattler. So tier 6 is probably guys that I absolutely would not start this week. Tier 5 are guys that, like, if you have a Brock Purdy get hurt, these are your backups. You can throw them in, but if they're not your backup and you don't have Brock Purdy, then don't throw them into the game because it's not going to matter because they aren't going to be good against whoever they're playing. That's my tier rankings for week 2 of fantasy football. We went through all the positions. Tell me who you have ranked higher or lower in your list and what you think about my list and where I should have people. So I'd love to hear your opinion, love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share. It always helps the YouTube channel grow. So here at Ticket with Tippett, trying to build a good YouTube channel. So share this as much as possible with your friends. Let them know, hey, man, he's starting this guy over this guy. You got to, switch your player around on your bench. So, we're still trying to look out for people in fantasy. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for stopping by. Peace, dope, and love, and we'll see you later.